بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي خلق السماوات والأرض وجعل الظلمات والنور ثم الذين كفروا بربهم يعدلون والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وعظيمنا محمد وعلى آله الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا ورضي الله عن أصحابه المنتجبين العادلين والتابعين لهم بخير وإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأما بعد ثم يقول الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم بعد أن نعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير صدق الله العلي العظيم. Brothers and sisters in Islam, assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening and to discuss this topic. And as we are going into February, which is called Black History Month, I think that it is good for me to start talking about why there is a Black History Month, and then why is this topic in terms of Islam and blackness needs to be clarified for this contemporary time. Now, firstly, how Black History Month came about in these United States of America. There was an African-American academic by the name of Dr. Carter G. Woodson who noticed and who saw that basically there was nothing positive and very little accurate being told about African-Americans in textbooks in public schools as well as in the university level. Therefore, he came up with Black History Week as a time of celebrating and focusing on Black history and trying to center positive accomplishments of African Americans. And from Black History Week, this then later grew into Black History Month. So it's not a conspiracy that February is the shortest month of the year, that somehow some people picked Black History Month to be the shortest month of the year. Black History Month was not started by white Americans. So this is number one. The second piece is as very, I believe, important for us as Muslims and even Arab Americans who aren't Muslim to understand the history of blackness, because there is a historical linkage and actually a connection between Arabness and blackness, and these two things or identities had never been mutually exclusive, which I will be touching on in my talk from a linguistic as well as a historical perspective. Now, when we're talking about blacks or blackness in Islam, the identity of blackness is not something static, right? What it means to be black in the United States of America in the year 2016 does not mean the same thing of what it means to be black or the parameters of blackness in Mali, West Africa in the year 2016, or blackness in Zanzibar, modern in Tanzania in 2016, or if we go back in history a few hundred years ago, how the term black and how it was understood has some different meaning regarding socially, politically than it does today in the United States of America. So when I'm talking about this issue, bi'idhnillah, I'm going to try to show like some of the differences in terms of how we should understand the term blackness. Now, when we look at the term blackness, or many of us think about the term blackness when we attach a modern day understanding as Americans, we look at blackness as being a particular phenotype or particular physical characteristics that is primarily dominated by melanin, and that a person has a certain degree of blood or lineage that descends from Africa. Now, when we go back into Islamic history from the very early days, and we look at the term black and how black was used, there was a different paradigm or a different set of parameters that were used. So, for example, Ibn al-Mundhir, he's a famous linguist. There's a book called Lisan al-Arab. All, or basically most Islamic scholars, when they go to look at the etymology or how words used to be understood in classical Arabic, they look back to this lexicon called Lisan al-Arab. And if you look at the definition of Lisan al-Arab, of how the term Arab was understood in classical times, and how the term non-Arab was understood, that there was some dominant features or dominant characteristics that were ascribed to how the Arabs were. And of course, the origin of Arab people, I mean, first there were the original Arabs of Ad and Thamud, and those nations were destroyed. And then you have Bani Qahtan, which is in Yemen. And then, so like all Arabs today have some sort of lineage that comes from Bani Qahtan in Yemen and also in Oman, and then Arabs spread to Hijaz, and then later on Arabs spread with the spread of Islam to Bilad al-Sham, to Egypt, and to North Africa. Then these people later became Arabized. So in terms of this, he said in regards to the meaning of Arab, that how Arab was mostly understood was Alwan al-Arab, as-sumra wa udma. This is the primary characteristics of melanin or skin color of how Arabs were understood back in the day, before Arabs spread and intermarried with Turks, Persians, and other people and began to be lighter in skin color. The Arabs were described as being brown skin or dark brown skin. And of many of the Arabs were also described as hair as being jad or kinky. Ajam is described predominantly as being those people who are bayad wa humra, those who are considered to have white skin, or we could say, humra or ahmar is literally meaning red, right? And this is associated by Ibn al-Mundhir and other linguists, is that when the Ajam was discussed, like in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, where he said, لا فضل للعربيين على الأعجمي وللأعجميين على العربي وللأسود على الأحمر وللأحمر على الأسود إلا بالتقوى. Al-Ahmar in this context meant people who were Rumi people, Romans, Turks, and Persians. Ahmar was the primary description of these people. So Arabness linguistically was associated back in those times with people who had darker skin, before Islam spread outside of the Arabian Peninsula. This is something very important to understand, because as in those times a long time ago, and as in modern times, there are people who would be considered in the Arab countries to be black Arabs. Like all Arabs just don't look like people from Syria and Lebanon. Like Sudan is a country, it's in Africa, and in northern Sudan, people are Arabs, and there are people who can trace their lineage back to the early companions, and some of them are even Shurafa, some of the people there are even Hassani, descendants of Imam Hassan alayhi salam, who reside in Sudan, for instance. In the Gulf countries, like the Saba family in Kuwait, if you take off their dishdasha and their head covering, some of the Saba family could look like people walking around the east side of Detroit. I met some people who were Shurafa. I met a brother by the name of Abu Talib the first time I made Hajj 11 years ago. And he looked like someone who was from sub-Saharan Africa, but he was Sayyid, he was Sharif, he was Husseini. So there's never been this type of mutual exclusivity between black physical features or so-called black phenotype and even Arabs. So this is something important to understand. Now, when we look at Islamic history, and the brother mentioned Bilal, I'm not going to mention anything about Bilal tonight because everyone knows about Bilal, and Bilal in many ways has been tokenized. He's like the one black Muslim, right, that people talk about Bilal. There were many of the earlier followers of Islam who were not only Habashi or Nubi, from Nubia, which I'm going to explain where Nubia is, inshallah, through this talk, but also were people who were Arab, and by modern day descriptions, based upon in the kutub, they would be classified or be seen as being both Arab and black. They would be seen as both Arab and black. So I will first start off with a story of one Sahabi. His name, he was one of the people, the faithful companions who accepted Islam in El-Medina. He's written about in the books, he's called Sa'd al-Aswad, Sa'd the Black. But he came from a tribe called Bani Sulaim. And Bani Sulaim is a particular tribe, if you read the works of El-Jahiz and other historians, that this was one tribe in the Hijaz that for some reason most of the men and women in Bani Sulaim, an Arab tribe in Sudan, they were described as being Sud. They were described as being blacks, but they were from the Hijaz, but they were described as being blacks. Sa'd as-Sulami, or Sa'd al-Aswad, he had an issue. And his issue was that he was being turned down for marriage in El-Medina. None of the different families of the Ansar would allow Sa'd to marry. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saw Sa'd as-Sulami crying one day. This is narrated in several books. Tanwir al-Ghabish, وفي فضل السودان وحبش is one book by Ibn al-Jawzi, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. This man is written about in several books. Sa'd was weeping one day, and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa saw him crying and asked him, what is the problem? What's wrong? Sa'd asked Rasulullah, he said, Ya Rasulullah, can a black man who's ugly enter Jannah? Because the companions, some of the people, they described Sa'd as kana aswadun lawn damiman. He was qasiran, short, aswadun lawn, had black skin, and called damiman. That's not a good term, right? He's very ugly, like he's wretched looking, is how he was described. He was crying. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa said, go to Amr bin Wahab's house, al-Ansari. Amr bin Wahab, and say, I sent you there to marry. Go him and tell Amr tell him marry his daughter to you. Sa'd goes and knocks on the door. Amr bin Wahab opens the door and sees Sa'd. So what are you here for? He said, Rasulullah sent me to your home for me to marry your daughter. Amr said, don't you know who my family is? Don't you see how beautiful my daughter is? You expect my daughter to marry an ugly black man like you? This is a Sahabi. Sa'd went back to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa crying. The girl heard at the door and asked her father, why did this man come to the home? What was this? Why did he come? Why is Sa'd here? Said that Muhammad sent this man Sa'd to our home for me to marry you, but by Allah, I will not allow you to marry this man. The woman said, how could I turn down a proposal that comes from Habibullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi? And she went ahead and married Saad. She went ahead and married Saad. And Saad later became shaheed in a ghazwa. But this is one notable companion. And I say this, and I'm going to mention a couple of other these personalities before I move on to Bani Abbas and then something about closer in history. But I have to pause and say this right here. And we are here, and the majority of you follow Madhab Jafari, say you follow the minhaj of Ahl Bayt al-Nubuwah. And there's one thing I've seen in the different communities I've gone to. Those who are the lovers of Ahl Bayt al-Nubuwah know very little about the Sahaba, and then most of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah knows very little about Ahlul Bayt. We need to educate ourselves about our early personalities. There were some problematic companions. Many of them were very loyal, very faithful, upright character. They contributed more to Islam than probably any of us will ever contribute. And we should know about them, know something about their biographies, and know about the sacrifices they did in Mecca when there was no gain that could have been made from accepting Islam, when Muslims were tortured in a number of different humilities befell the Muslims. Another one of these personalities I like to mention, maybe you've never heard of her. Her name is, mashallah, her name is a blessing. Her name is Barakah. Barakah, her nickname, Ayman. Ayman was Habashia. She was from Ethiopian background, and she was a servant of the household of Abdullah and Amina, the Prophet's parents. And when our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, the first person who grabbed him and cleaned him before he was put into the arms of his blessed mother was Ayman. And how he referred to Ayman, she was one of the earliest Muslims who accepted Islam. She was one of those who was of the Mustad'afin, who made migration from Mecca to Habasha to Ethiopia, because the first place to protect Muslims were actually Africans, African Christians. How Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to describe her, he say, Ayman, Ummi, Ba'da Ummi. Ayman, Ummi, Ba'da Ummi. Ayman is the mother after my blood mother, because this African woman was so devoted to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to the prophetic household. When she lost her husband and she was in Medina, the Prophet was around some of his Sahaba, and he asked the Sahaba, who would like to marry a woman from the people of paradise? Who would like to marry a woman from the people of paradise? So, of course, people were excited. When he called forward Ayman, those same people who seemed excited weren't too thrilled about Ayman. But it was Zayd bin Haritha, the young boy who grew up in the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the one who stepped forward and married Ayman, and they gave birth to a son by the name of Usama bin Zayd, who was the last general of the time of the Sahaba, who was described as being black. He was a teenager. He was the last general when the Muslims went into Bilad al-Sham, went into Palestine. Some of the senior companions didn't want to follow this teenage black man, black boy, as a general. They doubted the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. But it was a message that the Prophet was giving. Not just the companions. He had foresight, and I'm sure he knew that this history and these stories would be extended to generations of Muslims to come. And some of those big companions that rejected Usama, they were rebuked, they were put in their place, and they end up having to follow Usama to Bilad al-Sham when he led the Ghazwa. This is another stellar person that we need to know about, that I want to raise your awareness of. Now, in regards to the descendants of Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi alayhi. Many people don't know about the descriptions of the Alawiyin and of the Imams. Many people who claim to be lovers of Ahlul Bayt don't even know the wives of the Imams. Don't even know that the Imams themselves married from Africa, and that some of the Imams themselves were at least my skin color, if not darker. Don't like the picture that you may see in the time of Ashura or the 12 Imams all looking like Persians. They didn't look that way. So I want to go through a couple of the wives and some of the descriptions. One of them, firstly, is the wife of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Ja'far as-Sadiq, he married a woman by the name of Hamida, al-Barbariya. The Berber people is a qabila, and this qabila extended from North Africa down into sub-Saharan Africa. It'd be in the mountains of the lower part of North Africa, the modern day like Maghrib and El Jazair, down to sub-Saharan Africa around the area of Niger or Niger and Mali. This is where the Berber people were at then, and this is where the Berber people live at now. This woman, this great woman Hamida, was the wife of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq. And they gave birth, and first of all, let me also explain some of the physical characteristics or description of Imam as-Sadiq before I continue to his son, Imam Musa al-Qadhim. In Al-Fusul al-Muhimma by Ibn al-Sabagh, you will see that his description is Kana Mu'tadil Adamul Lawn. This is how Imam as-Sadiq is described. Adam, in classical Arabic, means dark brown. Like Adam, ma'na adim min al-ard. Like if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's and you buy yourself a bag of topsoil, the word Adam, if you look at classical Arabic texts, it means the color of topsoil. This is what Adam means. Not the name Adam, but Adam we know was made from the earth. But this is what the word Adam means. So he was basically what we could say light brown in skin color. Like Mu'tadil Adam is basically like my skin color, just to make it more real for you. And he's described as his hair being jad. You know what jad? Jad is, this is jad. It's kinky hair. This is jad. They gave birth to his son, Musa al-Qadhim alayhi salam, the Imam. So then he's Arab, his mother is African. So what makes up an Arab is paternal. Like with Yahud, it's maternal. If you're born from a Yahudiya, your mother is Jewish, then you're Jewish. Arab lineage and who's an Arab is based upon who one's father is, and then there's normally some cultural attachment that's related to language about who is an Arab. So Imam Musa al-Kadhim definitely was Arab, but his mother was from Africa. And he's described as being Kana Adam, having dark brown skin, and his sha'r, or his hair, Jad. So if he were walking, and I said this at Darul Hikmah a few years ago and rubbed some people the wrong way, and I want to backtrack to the story of Saad that I told you. I told the people at Darul Hikmah, and we know how Ansari our community can be. I said, if Imam Musa al-Kadhim walked into this markaz, but you didn't know who he was, and he was wearing a suit like Hajj Dawud, and he went to go marry one of your daughters, 80% of you would turn the Imam away. Now, Imam Ali al-Rida alayhi salam, his wife was called Sabika and Nubia, the Nubian. Nubians are people that are in the southern part of Egypt to the northern part of Sudan. Those are where the Nubian people are at. There are Nubian people there today, and there are still some people that speak the lugha of Nubia, the Nubian language, although most of the people speak Arabic, but Nubian people still stick to their Qabila and they say they're Nubian. In the southern part of Egypt, like Aswan area, like remember President Anwar Sadat, he's the president of Egypt, like he was half Nubian. And the part of Sudan where a lot of people from Sudan are Nubian people. There's two primary Arab tribes in Sudan, but you still have Nubians, you have the Fur tribes, the Ghawa tribe. There's different Qaba'il in Sudan. He married, Imam Ali al-Rida alayhi salam, married a Nubian, also black African woman. And their son was Imam Muhammad al-Jawad alayhi salam, who was described Kana Adam. He had dark brown skin, and his hair would resemble something like my hair. So, again, when we're talking about blackness in America, according to the perverted standard that came up, if your blood is 1/8 black, then you're black, meaning that you have to go back. If there's someone in your generations that go back up to 8 generations, according to the skewed basis of how America was founded, this would classify you as being black. Now they're trying to come up with a multiracial category, which means that as long as you had 1/8 black, you would be perpetually enslaved. This is the American paradigm, right? This is part of American history. So blackness in America doesn't even really stick to a particular phenotype, because someone can be very light, someone can be like around my skin color, someone can be as dark as someone from the Hausa tribe in Nigeria. They could be jet black. They could have straighter hair or wavier hair or kinky hair in the United States of America. You see, so just going back to my point that in every area, in every land, blackness has a different type of understanding or a different type of parameters. But in Islamic history, just looking at someone sometimes wasn't necessarily a marker or determiner of who was considered black or not. Sometimes it was based upon someone's tribe. But those people would still have African phenotype. Al-Miqdad ibn al-Aswad from Bani Kinda. He's from Yemen, but he was described as being dark, but he was Arab. He's from Yemen. Just as many people who are from Hyderabad to this day in Yemen could pass for African Americans. Or the Sahabi Jalil, Abdullahi ibn Mas'ud, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayh, he is described as Kana Adam. He's dark brown. But he's Arab. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Arab. So this whole thing about colorism that has reached up in the community and about who is more Arab than who isn't Arab, and trying to look at other people who are maybe darker skinned as not being authentically Arab. This is something that is bizarre, and there's some history behind this, which gets me to the next point, because it's not just colonialism. This type of ta'assub or al-unsariya popped up in the very early history of Islam, and it started in the end years of Bani Umayyah, the Khulafa Bani Umayyah, and then it flourished even more under Bani Abbas, the Khulafa Bani Abbas. Bani Abbas, every single Khalifa, there was a revolt. And not just one revolt, several revolts. Most of the revolts were led by the Alawiyin, like from An-Nasr al-Zakiyya, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, and his brother Ibrahim. Example, they led one thawra. There were several revolts. There was an intifada all the time going on against Bani Abbas. One of the famous revolts that ended up turning out very bloody was actually led by people we would call black Muslims. There were Muslims who actually were brought into Iraq, southern Iraq, and they were made slaves. And like, this is haram, because we know that Muslims aren't supposed to go to fight or go to set out and purposely enslave other Muslims. This actually happened under Bani Abbas. This happened. So there's something in the Islamic history books, it's called Thawra to Zenj. The Thawra of Zenj, the Zenji people, meaning those people who came from Africa and had settled into southern part of Iraq. Because they enslaved the men or brought them in, the females were taken to Baghdad and other places and used as servants and for other purposes by Bani Abbas. And I won't get into those purposes, but I think you know what I mean. And then the men were made to work in the fields and made to work as labor, and particularly in Basra. And those men ended up revolting, and there were some of the Alawiyin that were with them that revolted, and they revolted against Bani Abbas, and they had a government that was independent from Bani Abbas for almost a decade. They fought off Bani Abbas for a little bit over a decade, and those black Muslims, those Muslims who were Africans, ended up intermarrying with the women from Basra who were Arabs. But many of the leaders of that movement, they were brutally killed, and some of those people were made into servants today. And to this day, in southern Iraq, and we actually have a few in Detroit area, Dearborn, Basrawi people, you will see that there are African people, African-looking people, people with African descent, people who look like me, who are in Basra. If any of you, especially I know some of you are Iraqis, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are Basrawi people that they have their lineage going all the way back to the time of Bani Abbas. They've been in Iraq for about 1,200 years. But they actually revolted against Abbasi Arab chauvinism, and they had an independent government for about a little over a decade. And there's several more stories of revolts, as well as governments in which people of African descent governed areas, in particularly in West Africa, where there were great Muslim African empires, the Malian Empire, the famous Timbuktu, and the famous university that was there that those Takfiris raided a few years ago and burned up manuscripts, Islamic manuscripts that went back like 1,000 years. They burned them, they burned the library. Takfiris hate knowledge. That's one of the things they do. They like to burn up stuff. They burn up people, they even burn up books. The Malian Empire, the Ghanaian Empire, These were great, the empire of Sokoto in Nigeria, great empires that were led by Muslims of African descent, in which in some areas, especially in Ghana, they governed non-Muslims. Majority non-Muslims actually went along with the governance and didn't rebel. It actually was the colonialists that came and undid these governments, which is a point that I point out to Islamophobes. And they say, oh, you Muslims, especially Muslims in Dearborn, right? You all want to force Sharia on everyone, right? That Islam was spread by the sword. Well, if we look at from the Mughal Empire in India to some of the West African Islamic empires, you will see that they govern, they were Muslims who governed majority non-Muslims. They allowed them to practice their religions freely, and actually those people within those empires were not forced to accept Islam by the sword, and in fact, those people actually paid homage to the Muslim rulers. It wasn't spread by the sword. If that's the case, then India and Ghana would be majority Muslim to this day. If that's the case, if Muslims just came and ruled and spread everything by the sword. That is not the historical case. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Now, let me end with something from America. It is estimated between 20 and 30% of Africans who were brought to the Americas were Muslim. Between 20 to 30%. Dr. Butch Bilal Ware, he teaches African studies in Islam and Africa at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And he's written about this, and he is one of several academics that has done thorough research on this. There's another woman by the name of Sylvia Diouf, but it's spelled D-I-O-U-F. There is a book called Servants of Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas, that shows the millions of Muslims that were brought to the United States of America, in the Caribbean, down to Brazil, and that many of the slave revolts actually were led by Muslims. If you were to go online and look at slave narratives of slaves in America who were literate, who actually could read and write, you can go online and you will see some of these, and you will see that the vast majority of these were written in the Arabic language. The vast majority of slave narratives in America were written in the Arabic language by Muslims who had been enslaved. Some of them were hufaz, memorized the entire Quran. Some of them wrote the Quran. Some of them were ulama of the Maliki school of thought. Dr. Bilal Ware has even said, and he has proof of this, that actually a small percentage, but yet there were some who were actually shurafa, who actually were descendants of Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, who were enslaved and brought to America. And in the Americas, there are some people who are sada, who are sayyids, who don't even know it. They don't even know it. SubhanAllah. The American slave experience was something that was unique, uniquely brutal in the history of humankind. And I will say this and then end with one last comment, inshallah. In other civilizations, when people were enslaved, for the most part, it wasn't based upon race, so-called race, because we know there's only one race, the human race. Race is a man-made construct. People would fight with another tribe, another group of people they would lose, and if they lost, they would be enslaved. In many cases, people would enslave people in Africa in particular, even amongst the Arabs. the Jariya or the Khadim would become like a part of a family. Sometimes they would be freed. Sometimes they would end up marrying into the family. This happened. This happened with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Mu'mineen Safiya, she came from a Jewish tribe. She was given as a Jariya, as a Emma, as a slave. He liberated her, and then they ended up marrying. See, so the paradigm was different, and it wasn't just based upon phenotype. Here in the Americas, so-called race played a factor of phenotype of who was to be enslaved and kept in chattel slavery, and then in order to justify it, there was a dehumanization process, and even science, even so-called scientific, anthropological justifications of why African people should be kept enslaved. Even to the point that they said that slavery was better for African people. We were happy, and that don't teach them how to read and write, because if you teach Africans how to read and write, they're going to get a little knowledge, and that's going to make them sad. Because they're going to know that they're constricted by their boundaries of their animalistic tendencies. This is stuff that American scientists and anthropologists actually wrote about this. And dear brothers and sisters in Islam, my final point, and we're talking about this issue and how black history has been minimized, how white history has been centered or uplifted. We all need to understand and be honest with ourselves that those of us who are not from the status quo of Western society, especially if we come from lands that were colonialized by the British and the French, that we have colonialized minds in one way or another, and we have to decolonialize our minds. We all have absorbed implicit bias about other people. And whiteness, Europeanness, has been centered for years as being the most civilized, the most educated, the most beautiful, and the antithesis of whiteness is blackness. Therefore, it's also been drilled into people's minds explicitly and implicitly that the most backwards, the most uneducated, the most savage people, the people who are most untrustworthy, the people who act most off of their shahwat are African people or black people. This has been drilled in our minds in history books, said by politicians, to even if you watch Hollywood movies, and stay away from most Hollywood. I'd say stay away from 99% of Hollywood movies. So we have to be aware of how this implicit bias even affects how we interact with each other, right? And then if we are exhibiting what's called microaggressions, where we slight people or insult people knowingly, but most of the time with Muslims, I believe it's unknowingly. But still, we do it. Like, oh, she looks so beautiful for a dark girl. Like, what is that? That's a slight. Like what? So dark skin is, I heard this recently actually from a community leader talking about, that, we have our beautiful white skin, Like, what is that? Like, God, Allah Azza wa Jal, said, لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam. He honored all the children of Adam. My dad taught me that people are like flowers in a flower bed. You have yellow tulips, they're beautiful and smell good, and you have the purple flowers, and you have red roses and black orchids, and those flowers all together, they have their own individual beauty, and when they come together, they look more beautiful than just the flowers by themselves in their own patch. My father told me this, right? So white skin is beautiful, yellow skin is beautiful, red skin is beautiful, brown skin is beautiful, and black skin is beautiful because Allah Azza wa Jal created all. So be careful. لا يدخلن أحدكم عبدي فكلكم عبيد الله من أقوال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله. None of you call anyone my slave, for all of you are slaves of God. And don't tell me this stuff, kuluna abidullah, when you call someone black. You don't call your own family abid. Right? Don't cut that out. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he actually did something beautiful. He changed the language. When the Arabs used to call people abid or abd, he gave the term for someone who was free from slave, called them mawla, or mawali in plural. Mawla literally means master. So if you read the books, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, he freed Salman from Persia, ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhi. If you read the books, it says, Salman al-Muhammadi Mawla Rasulillahi Muhammad. Salmanu minna ahlul bayt. Min aqwal al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. Mawla qawmi minhum. Another saying of his. A mawla, a free slave of a people. Literally it means master. A free slave of a qawm, of a people, is from them. He becomes like one of them. Islam is revolutionary. Let us be revolutionary in 2016 in Dearborn Heights and in Dearborn and in Detroit. We have some jahiliyyah amongst us. And some has to do, frankly, with how Arabs deal with black Americans. So we have to work on this and get rid of some of these negative perceptions that we have, which includes the black Arab as well. I don't want to leave out the Sudanese people and the other people who come from the land of the Arabs who themselves have black skin as well. We don't want to leave them out either. So with that, thank you very much. I will be here after the lecture, inshallah. If you have any questions, I actually brought my book and brought some references because I know some of the things that I say, especially about Ahlul Bayt, people want to, it makes them a little uneasy. I had one brother say, oh, how can you say that the imams, some of them had black skin, the imams were beautiful, as if saying they had black skin is some sort of put down of the imams. I had a brother tell me that long ago, subhanAllah. You know, so we have to work on that, brothers and sisters. Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima.